Welcome to Baking with Hillary. I'm Hillary Clinton, and today I'm going to demonstrate how nation building is a lot like baking a cake. First, choose your recipe. As a superpower, I like recipes that are rich in resources. Think of these resources as delicious ingredients, like oil. Oil is needed to make your cake nice and tender. Now start by pouring money into a conflict. Lots and lots of money. If you run out, not a problem. We can print more and we will. Next, spice things up by funding extremist groups. Who doesn't love cinnamon to think people used to kill for this stuff? It's time for the sugar. The sweetest part about nation building is when you have corporate control of the government and corporate control of the media, you have complete control of the narrative. I call this step, I swear they wanted to be liberated. Occasionally, it'll be necessary to bomb cities or open fire on civilians. Now let's beat it to death. It's okay if it gets a little messy. Regime change can be messy. Almost done, but first we have to install a puppet government. Yeah. Oh, I'm not sure this fits. Now bake it at 400 degrees for 20 years and voila! It's probably a fucked up cake, but you might be able to cover it with democracy frosting. If your cake gets ruined, oh well, there are plenty of more opportunities to bake more cakes. I once baked a Libyan basbousa cake that went terribly awry. And remember, don't get caught up on one recipe when there are so many recipes to try. I'm thinking a tres leches cake next. I love the Mexican people. That's it for Baking with Hillary. I'm Hillary Clinton, and remember, we came, we saw, he died.
There's death, there's destruction.
Global news impacts us.
We have to change the way we live. This is why we need independent media.
Hello, one and all. Cheers and salutations. Welcome to another episode of Hard Lens Media. We are live here on our show. So good to have all of you here with us. Shout out to our CAN TV audience here as well. Again, as always on this show, we want to bring in people who are speaking truth to power and actually want to create a better future for us all to live in. And I'm joined here with two guests joining us here for the first time ever. One of them is also the producer for Savvy Sab's show. She is also a contributor to the Revolutionary Blackout Network. Please give it up for Eric T. and Corey Larson Thomas. Thank you, gentlemen, both of you, for taking time out of your day to join us on this wonderful Friday morning for our viewers and subscribers. Could you please introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about yourselves and really about also about the 11 demands. So, Eric, we'll start off with you, and then Corey,
Sure.
we want your introduction as well.
All right, Kit, thanks a lot. It's awesome to be here. I love that the opening vid there, Misha. It's I was laughing out loud. That's good stuff. The cake's a mess.
Yes, it is. The cake is literally a lie.
The cake is a mess. Yeah, so I'm Eric T. Red. I do producing engineering work with Savvy Sabs on her show. Mm-hmm. We have a good time over there. I've been doing that for for a couple of years now. We get on the ground once in a while too, which is really good. I think we might be. I think we'll have some Mayday stuff, and. And I mean, as far as like the 11 demands and all that stuff, I was, I've just been trying to figure out, like all of us, what we do about this mess, this little hellscape we live in. And what occurred to me is that, like, people were talking about general strike and movements and protests and whatnot. If you're going to have a strike, what do you base the strike on? What do you have to have? You have to have demands. And I was looking around at what was out there, and I didn't really see, a really coherent, concrete set of demands out there. And so I took a stab at writing one up, and that was kind of the genesis of this. Yeah, I think that's good for a start.
All right. All right. Well, that's fascinating to hear. So first now then let's get to Corey. Please introduce yourself to our viewers and subscribers. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Good morning. I'm Corey. I also help with production on Savvy's House podcast. I have education and background in criminal justice reform and human services. Criminal justice reform is a really big point for me, and yeah, just my kind of 2 cents here on the 11 demands is um, the really big thing here is that we need to be specific of what we're asking when we challenge power. Challenging power is that great first movement, but then we have to have a concrete thing, and we're saying like, hey, whether you're talking about housing or defense or anything, this is the demand that we're going to request of you. It's very literal. You can't dance around it. So it's just kind of having that out there clearly of what we're asking for.
And it's fantastic. So first, before we get started, number one, I really like how it's turned up to 11 because it's not a 10. You can make 10 louder, but it's not 11, and 11 is higher than 10. I think we all can agree. So in many ways, look, we've said this on the show. Both parties, the DNC and the RNC, are corrupt. Same people who donate to the Democratic Party, guess what? Donate to the Republican Party. And as we enter this presidential election cycle, I won't say I'm jaded, and I won't say I'm a doomer. People have said I'm a doomer, all right? But I think I'm more of a jovial doomer because I've seen this happen now not once but twice, where people are now, well, propping up their favorite politician, thinking that their abuser actually respects them, when once the election's done, their abuser will go right back to cheating on them, stealing money, and beating them. And the thing is, what I want to see different from this election cycle, I keep on saying I want to see this, but it never happens. Maybe this time it will be different. And that is people starting investing more time into organization and movements not connected to Washington, D.C., not connected to the two-party system, supporting citizen ballot initiatives, and yes, supporting independents and third parties. Now, 11 demands. Here's what the intro paragraph starts off on. And Corey, Eric, maybe you could start off with this one. Corey, definitely I want you to chime in on this one as well. But it starts off, both major political parties are thoroughly corrupt. Again, this is probably the most factual sentence in the in American history right here. Both parties are thoroughly corrupt and only serve the interests of billionaires and large corporations. Thank you, Citizens United. Educating people about this difficult reality is a crucial first step. But what is step 2? The 11 demand strategy proposes the formation of a mass movement centered around coherent, concise set of demands and convergence of direct action, mutual aid, electoral efforts to achieve a better world. Now, my one pushback to this would be, all right, it's one thing to give these demands to politicians, but we know that politicians like to pretend that they're hearing. Is this more of trying to reach out to people? Because I think that that's a better ground to do so. And if so, how do we get this message out? Because it's one thing to have demands, but we know corporate media wants to censor people. And we also know that politicians love to lie to people. Eric, start it off.
So the first and foremost thing I would say generally about all of this is focus on the money. It's always down to and about the money. And if you're not focusing on the money, it's kind of amazing to me that there'll be all these conversations and all this talk about all these things. And people will manage to get through a whole conversation and call out the problems and whatnot and never get to the part that runs everything, big money in politics, in government. And so that's a real point of emphasis for me. Number one, it's just always bring it back to the money. We got to we got to figure out some way to get the money out, to reduce the influence, to have public financing of elections, to have to get the huge money in corporations to deal with it in media. Corporate media is a huge issue. And so I think having that focal point is really crucial. And as far as like how we're attacking and whatnot, as far as politicians go, I think a real left movement needs to be very adversarial. It needs to be, firstly, any politician that's not agreeing to the demands, which, really, in a lefty space, really aren't that radical. The whole list of 11, they're turned up to 11 compared to what Democrats do or whatnot. And so that's number one, is just being adversarial. And, even if they're supposedly giving it lip service, our response is, well, what have you done? Have you, it reminds me of like Force the Vote. back in the forced to vote battle. It was like
way back in 2021, and for those who
yeah,
don't know,
and they couldn't even do that.
Yeah.
But it was this idea of like, not only should they be doing this, I mean, they should be shutting down Congress over healthcare, over the war, over all these things. And the other step of it, and it's in there, this idea of that you bring in, it's about direct action. I don't think just taking it to politicians is going to get us there. I think we're going to need big numbers, and we're going to need to be in the street, and we're going to need to be, doing like they're doing in France to even have a shot at getting anywhere. And so the idea is you need to be organized around demands to do that. In France, they're organized around the demand about the retirement age.
Right.
You got to have demands and get in the street. I guess that would be my my summary.
Yeah, and that's a very good, correct assessment to have, especially in regards towards what we're seeing happening play out in France. Corey, in regards to this, and I want to pull this back up again, especially with the 11 demands. So construct a list of demands, and we'll actually be playing that. We'll be showing that list a little bit later. Embrace mutual aid and direct action as crucial tools as collaborative support, which I know RBN has been doing a lot of great work. I know Jimmy Dore has also been talking highly about what RBN, Revolutionary Blackout Network, is doing. Ask every candidate representative, do you support these demands? What are you going to enact them? Again, my personal opinion about these politicians, I think it's not only do we need to hold their feet to the fire, burn them at the stake, but anyways, enough of what I want to see. Let's talk about this. If they're not on board, then call them out that they are corrupt. I love that. Provide zero support for Democrats and Republicans. I would stop there, but that's great. Until they start enacting the demands, no votes, no money, no praise. I just think that this first sentence right here is, I think, music to everyone's ears on this wonderful Friday morning. Provide all possible support and aid to third-party and independent candidates who embrace the demands. Any serious candidate should already be calling out the current representatives as corrupt. When roadblocks are encountered, intensify actions, protests, general strikes, sit-ins, boycotts, as you mentioned earlier, and be relentless about pointing out the real source of problems: the billionaires and the mega corporations, the top 0.1% versus the rest of us. Corey, when people read this, though, are you concerned that individuals will say, well, this is just too much to ask. I'm just going to go back to trusting my representative, my U.S. senator, because they care about my best interests? Because, I hate saying this, but corporate media has done a phenomenal job in brainwashing so many Americans into thinking that what we have right now in this neoliberal hellscape is just fine. And eventually, maybe 50 years down the road, things could change. Maybe. But don't hold your breath. Take it away, Corey.
Yeah, for sure. So earlier, we were kind of talking about doomerism, and doomerism is one of those things that us on the left all experience. We all have that moment where it just looks all hopeless. So the biggest thing that we kind of are emphasizing with the 11 demands is collaboration. This is not something that we're saying, oh, well, the 11 demands replaces other aspects of it. We look at it as a dual-pronged approach, direct action, mutual aid, ballot initiatives, cooperatives. That's all part of the piece here. So as far as people looking as it being a little bit overwhelming, what I would say to that is the list is living. We encourage collaboration. We encourage people to suggest and make changes to the list. This is a living list, and also just to try to say, like, this is something that kind of needs to be done, because it's one thing to kind of talk about it, and that's the first step, but ultimately this needs to push us being out in the street. So the 11 demands, in essence, it is a framework. It's just a framework and kind of a suggestion within the movement of what we're going to call out in particular. And for different politicians, it's going to be different things. We might call out a politician on one group of the 11 demands, and it's essentially just a gradual process. So we definitely see the 11 demands not as the only answer, but as a framework within that we can hold a metric to the power. We can directly confront that power and say, hey, this is our demand, and then we can kind of follow up on that. A month later, weeks later, when we see that this political person isn't acting on that we have that metric to come back and call them out on. But it's a gradual process. It's part of this kind of awakening, and ultimately, I would just advocate this thing that we on the left all believe in, which is class solidarity, and using these demands to suss out what we need.
Mm-hmm. And look, and everything you said, especially in regards to this, I know some segments on this show, be it here on Can TV or when we go live on YouTube, Odyssey, Rockfin Rumble, and Twitch, I occasionally might seem pessimistic, but I don't want it to come off that way because you do mention that there is this whole idea of giving up, especially amongst progressives or independents, to where, okay, this is just how it is. I might as well sit back and enjoy the ride. But see, that's not the smart tactic to do. You could be jovial about it, but get back up, dust yourself off, and if you could take one hit, you could take another. But don't worry, you're going to get your swing in too. Because the thing is, we have to start stepping up. The way our current system is run and set up right now, we have politicians, and no, this is not being ageist, folks. This is just being real. We have politicians in their late 70s, early 80s, mid 80s who, let's face it, need to go to an old folks home or either that retire off into the sunset. When you have Biden, who will probably be the oldest serving president in U.S. history should he get reelected, listen, it is not easy to watch someone eventually reach into decline. I have seen that happen to not one but four of my relatives. The fact that we have a president that could be leading the free world, the most powerful country in the world at this current point in time, also have cognitive issues, should be raising the alarm. So that's why we need
Come
to start
on, man.
doing these. Hey, listen, Jack. Corn Pop was a bad dude, Eric. Okay, trust me on it. Trust me on it. He's got a whole fridge of ice cream upstairs. So you both better start falling in line. But nonetheless, though, these demands are important, and I know that currently, you were on Sabrina's show, you were on JB's show as well. Both of these two individuals are contributors to Revolutionary Blackout Network. Please, everyone, check out their YouTube channel and social media as well. And then, of course, you did not one but two forums as well. So I think it's perfectly a good time right now to bring up these 11 demands for real democracy. But before we do, Corey, is there anything else you want to initially add into this conversation? And Eric will close off with you before we pull up to the list of demands, because I think a lot of people might be seeing this stuff. And again, I don't want to keep bringing this point up, but you might have individuals who are just sitting on the sidelines, sitting on the fence, who are going to think, well, doesn't really matter what I do, because we've seen election fraud happen in the Democratic primary. We saw people lose everything from hope to thinking that things could change when Bernie Sanders not once but twice gave up, allowed himself to be cheated in the 2016 and 2020 primary. We've seen progressives getting smeared. We've seen the massive wave of censorship impacting libertarians, independents, progressives, activists, anyone speaking truth to power. The Twitter files revealed it. Mark Zuckerberg, in his interviews, Joe Rogan mentioned the same thing that was going on with Twitter. You had government agencies as well as the DNC and corporate media dictating what Facebook and Twitter could post, especially during the 2020 general election between Trump and Biden. I mean, you might have just people who just say, can this be done? Why should I step up?
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing I want to address is in terms of, feeling hopeless about it. That is not something that I'm stating is bad or hopeless. Like I said, we all feel that. And we all kind of have to challenge that within ourselves. So I completely get it. Trust me. In late night, when you're sitting there in bed, kind of ruminating over things, it can definitely seem pretty dark. What I would say about that is there is strength in numbers. The 11 demands is not a single player game. We need to, within our local communities, be organizing, getting groups together, because if you are able to, in wherever you're living, kind of rally together a group of people, that kind of positivity and hope can build up within each other. So really the key here is finding ways in which we can work together, because I believe that will give people more hope.
Agreed. You know what? And I think that's what we need to look at. So now let's go ahead and pull up this outstanding list of demands. And you know what? Reading this from the first time we were reaching out to you, reached out to me on social media, especially a huge shout out to Sabrina for also facilitating this reach out. But again, we're looking at 11 demands for real democracy. Now, many Americans might not know this, but slowly many are waking up to it. I said earlier in this interview, the people who donate to the Democratic Party also donate to the Republican Party, and the same people who control both parties also control our media. Fix big money in politics and government. We must enact the constitutional amendment. Now, we all know that Oh God, I'm gonna vomit in my brain saying his name. Cenk Uygur, host of TYT, tried to do something with that was Wolfpack. Now, obviously, many Americans don't know about a constitutional amendment. What does that mean? So, Eric, when you talk about a constitutional amendment, how can we get this amendment passed when there has been pushback? And the thing is, I was a former member of Wolfpack, and initially we did have pushback from groups associated with the Koch brothers. But then the largest opponent that we did have before I quit Wolfpack was eventually liberal think tanks. Democratic donors became the largest voices against a constitutional amendment to get money out of politics, because I think a lot of people don't know that the people who can buy our democracy control everything. Corporations, big banks. It's not just Russia that can interfere in elections. Our Supreme Court legalized bribery. Anyone, and hold on, for the people sitting in the back, anyone can interfere in our elections. Eric, take it away.
Yeah, it's I sometimes like to start this off with a simple question, putting out there, is our government corrupt? Is Congress corrupt? Is the president and the whole system?
I'm going to stop you right there. The answer is yes.
Yes. Oh, okay. Surprise. No. And so of course, if you put that question out there, you're going to get like a 90% yes reply rate to that amongst everyone, left, right, center, people who are into politics, people who aren't. And so the thing I like to look at is like, why aren't we using that? I mean, we need to, I think, as a left movement, as our real left movement, we need to figure out a way to leverage that, to use that. It's about the money. They're paid off. And so any movement, any demands, anything like this, to me, needs to focus first and foremost on the money. If you don't fix the money, it's not going to change. And this is something that Savvy Sabs has been saying on her show, and that's part of the reason why I hang out there and rock with Savvy. And so it's a hard lift. It's the constitutional amendment. It's a long, drawn out process that will need a lot of work and whatnot. But it's the reason you need it is that if any real measure that deals with money in elections, public financing of elections, and those kind of things, if it's something with teeth, if it's something that's strong regulation of elections and money, is going to run into the Supreme Court, and they're going to say, oh, well, money is speech. So you can't cut off, a billionaire's ability to inject all his money into a campaign. You're cutting off his free speech. And so, our answer to that needs to be, no, money is not speech. And these corporations, these huge corporations, can't just be injecting tons of money into the system. And so fixing that just, to me, has to be central, has to be a priority. And it can also be a litmus test. It can also be something to rally around. Kind of like I go back to Force the Vote again. Force the Vote exposed a lot of people. a lot of people that we thought.
And if I can interject in case, because a lot of our viewing audience, especially in CAN TV, may not know what Force the Vote was. Force the Vote was it is a tactic in which the U.S. House of Representatives could use in order to enact a demand from leadership, because there's a point to where a Speaker of the House will be selected. Now, the thing is, this forced a vote in 2021. This was when Nancy Pelosi was going for her final term, I guess, as Speaker of the House at the time. It was in which Jimmy Dore and so many other individuals were stepping up, especially during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, was to call for Medicare for all, to vote for a bill for Medicare for all. And the progressive members, 15 of them, including
so-called
AOC,
progressive.
So-called, thank you for that. They dismissed it, said that they weren't going to do it. They didn't want to raise the ruckus. They said it can't be done. And the thing is, all of them ran on Medicare for all, and they said it could never be done. Surprise, surprise, a few years later, McCarthy faces his own version of force to vote, and the Republicans who enacted their force to vote to get what they wanted, it turns out they did, and everything's still hunky-dory. That's just a short summary. We talk more about it on our YouTube channel. So, again, a constitutional amendment, and there's two ways to do it as well, and that is through the state level or through the federal level. with this, I got to ask you, maybe Corey, you can add into this. What is the tactic that you think is the best approach? Do we try at the federal level with our corrupt politicians who are doing insider trading, or do we try and do what Wolfpack, I don't know if they're still doing it or not, through the state level? How do we do this? Because again, calling for a constitutional amendment, there's two ways. You got to either get majority of the Senate and House to agree with it, or you get at least majority of the states to go along with a constitutional amendment. How do we do this? Which tactic's the best?
Yeah, I would say that really, as kind of as big a task as it is, we have to attack it at the federal level, and that can be part of the demands that we're calling out. Yeah, I know it is a big ask, but the thing is, I don't really think that we can address that issue properly only at the state level. I mean, state level actions are 100% great. That's great if that's something that gets done, but it really is something that over time, I think that we need to push the federal government. That being said, you could make the argument that ask of that federal constitutional amendment is not going to be the first thing that is the focus. It's if you imagine this like a boss battle, it's like we're slowly knocking down the hit points. It doesn't. We don't have to start with the biggest point of that, but that can be something that as we continue to push. And like the biggest thing is just to call people out, like direct actions, having this and wean down the system. And at that point, it's something that we could push further.
I mean, I'd connect it back to force the vote again. Like the idea with force the vote wasn't that we were suddenly going to win. It wasn't like it was suddenly we were going to have Medicare for all. At best, we would have forced Pelosi into a vote. But the idea with something like a constitutional amendment and Move to Amend is out there, as an organization working on this. The language of the constitutional amendment that looks good to me is from their site. It's real simple. But the idea, as much as anything, is to have a rallying point, to have a strong, specific demand, and not get caught up in, oh, well, can we do this? How long is it going to take? It's really hard. Yeah, it's really hard. There was a Caitlin Johnstone, who I love, a post from a while back called that was about long shots, and what she laid out is that every single thing that we try here that we're going to look at, or every potential strategy, is a long shot. Every one of these is going to be something where people can look at it and say, well, you'll never get that. That's almost impossible. Well, all the strategies are long shots, and at a certain point you have to pick kind of the least worst one in a way. You need to pick the one that looks the best, the one that's most effective, and decide that this is your demand and go for it.
Right. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sure. Thanks. So I mean, I agree. So it's the battle is uphill. Like as well as anybody can. Like when we're doing this independent media stuff, it is an uphill battle. We're fighting the algorithm. We're fighting censorship. We're fighting social media platforms that continue to suppress the left. These are all really difficult things. I'm a full believing that as a left, we just have to continue pushing, even if it seems pretty unlikely.
Agreed. So now moving on, and this is something that's going to, again, we talked a little bit about it, and we could look, richest country in the world, and we don't have healthcare, but yeah, our politicians have gold-plated healthcare. Okay. Now the thing is what a lot of our viewing audience, especially on YouTube, Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, and Twitch, we have international audience members. Shout out to the people across the world in Europa, Canada, Australia land. Everyone all across the world. In the United States, we have a thing called medical bankruptcy. Oh my goodness, what is medical bankruptcy? It's a foreign concept. No one's ever heard of it. It's only an American thing. And that is, our healthcare is tied to our jobs. So if an American is laid off or fired, oh no, they lose their healthcare. And one of the leading causes of homelessness is medical bankruptcy. One bad day, one horrible, God forbid, ailment, and you can lose everything. And we've seen plenty of horror stories in which people are in debt to the medical industrial complex, and big pharma also has a role to play in it. So I think we've talked about it a lot, but a short summary: Eric, implementing healthcare. Well, look, our politicians have gold-plated healthcare. Why should they give it to us?
Mm-hmm. Well, Yeah, as far as the demand goes, it's the idea of not just like when I feel like as like maybe what we'd call the real left, our little corner, maybe even the Jimmy Dore left, I don't know, the Sabby Sabs left, the 11 Demands left. That's another part I run into is like, what do we even call ourselves? But in this corner of the left, I think when someone, especially like a politician, brings up Medicare for all, our response should be, that's not even nearly good enough. Medicare for all is a compromise, and we should be demanding real, comprehensive, free at the point of service health care for everyone. And anything short of that, we need to be calling it out as what it is. It's brutal. We live in a brutal country. And so maybe we should start demanding that not to live in a brutal country.
Yeah. And so the other thing too is and don't get us wrong, like Medicare for all would be a positive thing. Where I see that as being potentially shaky is because it is still very much at risk for privatization schemes. Most Medicare plans have been kind of relegated to for-profit or not-for-profit insurance companies as like managed Medicare plans.
Medicare Advantage, woo!
Right, yeah. Hey, good stuff right there.
Yeah, and the other thing, just in the last point in the healthcare, I think it can really be a source of righteous anger, and I think that righteous anger can be a motivator for people to go out and do these actions. One thing that I always like to say that really irritates me, like you said, insurance being tied to work is awful, but also insurance companies make clinical decisions. Insurance companies play doctor. Your doctor doesn't get to decide what treatment you're going to get. If it's an inexpensive or generic treatment, it might be fine. But if it's some treatment that you need that is big ticket, that insurance company is acting as your doctor. And that is just not acceptable to me.
Agreed. So now moving on to another part of this, with the 11 demands, a minimum standard of living for everyone, to which I have to say, look, other countries have this. They have affordable education, eliminate student loan debt, mandate paid paternity leave. There are some retail companies that as soon as a woman gives birth to a child, you're only off work for a week. Now get back to work. I know the United States pretty draconian here. Provide reparations via solution that treats them as they are, a debt owed. Protect Social Security. That's going to be going away thanks to our wonderful representatives and politicians. Implement federal job guarantees. Create public food pantries. Provide housing for all. Take the minimum wage a real living. Make the minimum wage a real living wage. Eric, how do we get to this when we know for a fact politicians have made excuses saying that all of this is just too expensive, because it's a perfect tie-in then to end the wars. We got money for war. All this other stuff, well, that's a bridge too far. That'll break the camel's back. How do we get there? And I think that's a good way that we can address 3 and 4, because we got the money for the war. We got this horrific war happening in Ukraine. And you would think that the United States and all the allies would be calling for diplomacy at every point in time. But again, we have all this billions of dollars. And again, I'm surprised how quick they're finding this money, but nothing to do about student debt. Nothing to do about housing or food security or federal jobs guarantee or anything else. How do we get this when you know for a fact a politician will say this is just, it's too much?
How are you going to pay for that, right?
How will you pay for that?
Well, I mean, we literally do have in MMT theory, lays this out. We literally do have a money tree. In the form of the dollar. Now, Biden, of course, is doing his best to kill the dollar, but it still is, very effective at the moment anyways. And it's all about allocation, right? It's all about who makes the decisions, who runs the shows. And so if we don't have strong demands, so like minimum standard of living is similar to the healthcare one. Like, when a politician says, let's fight for 15, our response should be like, that's not even close to good enough. So, appreciate you want to fight, but, we need a real minimum standard of living. That means, living wage, housing, food and water, just able to be alive for everyone. And this idea, and then, of course, it ties into the wars. And America is a rich, it's just unimaginable. It's kind of unimaginable the resources that this country has. It's in terms of physical, natural resources, in terms of what the workforce produces. And what's happening now is so many of those resources are being redirected, upward to that top 0.1%, upward to the billionaires and the mega corporations. And the wars are just another aspect of that. All wars are resource wars. It's all about funneling money up to that same group. So the first step is to recognize that and to be having these clear demands of changing that. And what it's going to take is like the politicians aren't going to do it for us because they're bought and paid for. They don't represent us. They represent their donor owners. We need to figure out how to inspire a mass movement, how to get people into some kind of group where they're demanding these things and they're literally getting in the street over them and putting pressure on. And that's what it's going to take in terms of to get the politicians to do it.
Corey, now the thing is too, adding on to that, ending the wars. It's one thing to say that. It's another thing altogether to really address these politicians that are connected to it. Because again, side note for anyone who doesn't know this, before the war broke out in Ukraine, as the Russian tanks were getting close to the border, this information was brought to the attention of a lot of House representatives before 2022 was closing up. And what did these brave politicians do? Did they immediately assemble the Congress and call for diplomatic peace? No, they called their brokers, and they literally made a killing in buying and selling shares of the military-industrial complex.
It's almost like it's all about the money.
Corey, how do we get to that? Because the thing is, too, it leads in a perfect response to also the climate emergency, because as industry is constantly expanding, we also, and I want to pull this up here too, because again, with the military industrial complex, and then you have the climate emergency crisis that we're in, it's the evidence is there. As we have money for war, industry and pollutants start impacting our environments. How do we do this when, again, it's the military industrial complex has a stranglehold over our system? How do we break that?
Yeah, it's a tough one because it's a big gravy train for a lot of people. Big peace actions, working with groups like Veterans for Peace, pushing into the street and basically just trying to expose as much as possible how coercive and abusive it is towards people. For example, enlisted men and women in the military, I believe that by and large, they are victims of the U.S. imperial power. This is something that over oil wars and resource wars, we have thrown a lot of our youth and end up having people that are disabled and in some way dead, harmed. I think that it's important to focus on that and to push really back on that and to turn it into a human argument. That's really the key for me is just calling that out, showing the horror of it, pointing out the fact that these politicians would never send their own children, and just trying to push that kind of hypocrisy, and also doing the pivot of what could we do with all the resources that we're sending towards endless wars. What can we do better with that? What could we do to build up the United States? It's one of those things too that gets into the minimum standard of living. I believe that politicians, particularly long-term politicians, are devoid of empathy because they're so far removed from the public. I always say that I wish that we could take Congress people and Senate people and have them spend time in some of the kind of more rough and downtrodden and suppressed neighborhoods to be confronted with the horror of it. And I believe that will be that, for the lack of a better term, ammunition to get people to really realize that these politicians are evil warmongers. They're sending American youth to their death, and they don't care. It's all about the profit.
Agreed. All right. Well, I'm liking so far. We're already five demands through. Let's talk about another one here: criminal justice reform. Now, Corey, I want to start off with you on this one. Criminal justice reform. When we talked about this here, especially in the early days of Hard Lens Media, look, we were still under the rule of Rahm Emanuel, everybody's favorite Chicago mayor, I guess at the time. I'm being sarcastic here. Where, again, under his big brain ideas, He decided to implement a policy shutting down 54 Chicago public schools, shutting down half the city's mental health facilities. And the thing is, it's easy to put all the blame on Rahm Emanuel, but we have to look at all the other mayors, current and past, who and also city council members, current and past, who helped implement a policy of neoliberalism. And for those who don't know, Chicago is a very hyper-segregated city, but this is a overall nationwide problem. But the thing is, when schools and resources are denied to communities, you create an environment of desperation in which then people are struggling day in, day out, and you create a hopeless environment. And as we've seen, especially here in Chicago, the CPD getting a lot of resources, as always. Everything else is just left with an empty plate. So how do we get to criminal justice reform, especially when we know, similar to the military industrial complex, the prison industrial complex has a huge stranglehold over our politicians nationwide?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm somewhat familiar with Chicago. The whole North Side, South Side thing. Definitely.
It's a little bit bigger than that. Not only is Chicago segregated from the North and South, but even within the North and South Side, there's segregation within segregation. I say Chicago's a hyper-segregated city, and I'm just going to make this statement here. It would even make Jim Crow take a step back and say, "Wow, you guys went too far." Look into the history of Chicago, folks. It's not pretty. It's not pretty. It's horrific and brutal all at once. So I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, take it away, Corey.
Oh no, I agree with that. So the first thing is poverty. I think that poverty should be looked at as a public health issue. I believe that the majority of crimes, be they property or violent, are related to poverty, because I think poverty, being a public health issue, causes mental illness, causes desperation in people. So addressing poverty, first of all, through other steps is a critical one. As for police, we have these militarized police. Police are not helping our neighborhoods. We need to completely reevaluate how we do policing in this country. For example, I don't think that the majority of police officers should be armed. I don't like when now they're looking completely like soldiers. Sure, there is potentially a place. Well, no, there is a place for armed police officers for certain events. They're going to have to respond to violent incidents. But look at like how they do it in the UK. They do have armed response cars that can respond to emergencies, but in general, the police are kind of less threatening, more viewed as community helpers. I think for some cities that there's been kind of positive actions where, especially for mental health related calls, they've kind of almost created like a fourth first responder service, where you have the police, fire, EMS, and also the mental health action teams that are going to be responding, are going to have the special treatment in terms of these kind of sensitive issues, because police officers, they always have a hammer and see a nail. They continue to just escalate things, and it's really just not an effective way to respond to some of the issues that we have. As far as like mental health treatment too, that's a really big one. During the deinstitutionalization process, which is around like Reagan, you had just completely a de-investment in proper mental health treatment that put people out on the streets with very little to do. And these are desperation times that people will end up doing things and which will have the police coming down on a hammer. It could happen to any of us. That's the big thing about it is I don't believe in this whole criminal mentality thing per se. Yes, there are certain people that definitely have that mentality. I'm not talking about like your Jeffrey Dahmer situation. As for where the state of like mental health treatment is right now, two of the biggest providers of mental health treatment in this country is the Cook County Jail in the Chicago area and the Los Angeles Jail. These jails have become our de facto mental health treatment centers, and that's something that should be very scary to people. And as far as like the drug war, it's just completely regressive. The drug war, the war on drugs, was essentially a domestic war against our own citizens, particularly marginalized communities. It has also, not to the same extent as the military, it has also sucked up a huge amount of money and has been an abject failure. Prohibition doesn't work. We all know that. They didn't even have any real impact on reducing drug usage or drug trafficking. I think the best thing would be to legalize it, but it's a huge failure, the war on drugs. And again, just going back to it is a clear change of we need to reevaluate policing. We need to turn it more into a public service agency.
And here's the thing, especially when we look at because you mentioned prohibition. Look, folks, people will always be attracted to vice. All right, that's how it's been since antiquity. And the thing is, let's face it, who is buying the drugs? Mr. and Mrs. America. And the thing is, the United States has been profiting off of the war on drugs thanks to the prison industrial complex. It's also causing political instability in Central and South America. That's why we do it leads to a bigger problem too, because that's why we have that crisis south of the border. So the thing is, the war on drugs, you can never win it. It will never be won. Similar with prohibition too. All right. Look, if anyone wants to get talk about a documentary series, check out Ken Burns' documentary series on prohibition. It didn't work. It didn't work. And if you look at just how people were pairing foods without alcohol, especially Italian meals, let's face it, it was kind of sacrilegious. No wonder people were breaking the law, because they wanted their goddamn booze. Just like people are going to want to do gambling, just like people are going to pay for sex. I mean, that's just how it is. There are smarter ways to deal with vice, but treating everything as though you have a hammer in your hand and everything's a nail, it's always going to blow up in your face. I want to pull up this one here. And Eric, Corey, you know about this. Hard Lens Media has learned this the difficult way as well. Not once, but 8 times our YouTube channel was censored, and we've defeated it. All those times we were shadow banned, demonetized, or unable to upload content thanks to our viewing audience. Reject censorship. Right now, there's this massive wave of censorship impacting the United States. When we have whistleblowers and journalists being prosecuted, free speech is at the risk of being axed thanks to the corporate overlords that control our politicians. And, of course, corporate media, well, they would never lie to you. How do we reject censorship when we know for a fact you have Democratic and Republican lawmakers, no matter who's in the majority in the House or Senate or who sits in the White House, they're always quick to enact censorship because they want to silence dissenting voices. Eric, how do we get there? I mean, how do we reject that? Because I don't see it stopping anytime soon. I see it getting worse.
Yeah, I mean, it's all of a piece. I go back to Caitlin Johnstone again, who talks a lot about how like power is being able to force people to do what you want, but real power is getting people to think they're doing what they want and they're really doing what you want, and that's about propaganda. It's about narrative, and that's the huge part of the power, and the elites that run everything, the billionaire class, they all have that interest in keeping the system the way it is. They know that there's a hell of a lot more of us than there are of them. And so they get it, that narrative is huge. Propaganda is huge as far as keeping the system going. And so it's up to us to talk about what a better world looks like, what to call this stuff out as censorship. I think the Twitter files has been a huge event in journalism and in this whole narrative game. It shows that it just made it obvious what everybody knew, but it showed it's the receipts that the government was right in there in the middle of social media, in this case Twitter, asking to take things down. And it's just such a direct and obvious affront to the Constitution, the First Amendment, to just basic human rights. And everybody gets that, and everybody saw that. And yeah, the corporate media can act like it's not a thing and whatnot, but it is a thing. And so it's about the way we're going to defeat it. It comes back to these systemic changes about forming a mass movement, about getting people clued in, and about getting people to demand these kind of changes. And that's what it's going to take. On the hopeful side, I mean, I know it can all sound pretty hopeless and pretty dark because right now we're on YouTube and if we say a few magic words, the screen will probably go dark and that'll be that. And it's ridiculous.
Yes, and it's a nightmare. I've seen it.
I feel you, kid.
Yeah, it's and I know a lot of my colleagues in independent media have gone through it too. We've gone through the gauntlet 8 times. We landed on our feet, but I know there are others who are still hurting. Hell, we're still recovering from our gut check in 2020.
And so I want to say on the positive side, we saw during Bernie's campaign, as much as, now we look back on it and we feel like we were duped and fooled and whatnot, there was a big thing happening there in Bernie's campaign, especially in 2016. He was calling out the billionaires and the banks, and he got millions of people excited and activated. The Black Lives Matter movement, I mean, that was in the middle of all these lockdowns. People got in the streets and they said, we don't care. We're going to go out and protest. And it wasn't perfect and it wasn't, everything was aligned, wasn't aligned right, and it got co-opted. But what it shows is that if you have a strong message out there, it's possible to get big numbers engaged.
Mm-hmm. All right. And you know what? I think that's a perfect note to end it on. Corey, I want to pull this up and ask you about this, though. Immigration reform. Now, I hate saying this, and I don't want anyone to think I'm being sarcastic here, but the kids are still in cages. I know that the Democrats were really raising a big stink about that during the 2020 election, but hell, even during Trump's presidency. But
they're blue cages now.
Yeah, well, they're nice. They're nice playpen blue cages now. But the thing is, what a lot of Americans don't know is that, and this isn't a defense of Trump, it was like that when he got there. That's a quote from The Simpsons. When Homer was teaching Bart how to be a man, how to shave, how to survive the workplace. If there's an accident, hey, just say it was like that when I got there. Well, in Trump's defense, it was like that when he got there because those cages really started to be built under a guy named Barack Obama. Don't worry. You never heard of him. Don't worry about it. You never heard of the guy. But Corey, how do we get immigration reform when we look at the previous other 7 things we brought up, especially with, of course, the ridiculous war on drugs, the prison industrial complex, the military industrial complex. The reason why there's so much instability, especially south of the border, is because of the political and economic instabilities and U.S. sanctions, the war on drugs, the coups that are happening in Central and South America. It just isn't one day somebody wakes up and says, I'm going to take this arduous march across swamps, rivers, gangland territory, warlord territory, over mountains, face starvation, disease, lose my loved ones just to get to America. It just isn't one day somebody decides to do that. There's a reason and why. There's a reason why there's a crisis south of the border. How do we get to immigration reform? Because, again, a lot of these politicians, yes, these scumbag politicians are profiting off of what's happening south of the border, too. The corporate media will never tell that to you folks. Corey, take it away.
I think this also comes down to confronting people with the horror. There should be journalism. There should be, people kind of covering this, showing exactly what it is we're doing. I think this gets down to the whole, brunch class, the professional middle class, who were all ramped up around the 2020 election because, Trump bad. And now, that Biden was back in, they kind of like went back to brunch and they're really not thinking about it. It's something that needs to be confronted with the public and kind of see the real horror that's being done in our government. I think if that would be the case, that would manufacture outrage, which would be, an impetus to really call up people. This is an immigrant nation. That's supposed to be one of the best things about this. I mean, you can obviously go back and say, like, yes, the United States did push out a native population, which of course is beyond awful. But as it is today, the strength of our country used to be through immigration. That was one of the best things, is bring us, you're sick, you're tired, you're poor. We, for many years, had kind of a rotating door immigration policy with Mexico, which was mutually beneficial for most countries. And really also, when it comes down to it, just to confront the racism aspect to it, because we don't have this system on the Canadian border. It's all down south. So, I think there's a lot of inferences there, and people just need to be confronted with it and really need to be made uncomfortable with it. Like we see with like Jose Vega and other people that have been doing these actions and calling out Lucy and these groups. we see the uncomfortableness of the kind of like normal kind of maybe like unpolitically awakened people of it. And I do believe that if that's something that we keep pushing at, people will eventually kind of come out of that haze and realize what's being done in their name as the American public.
And the thing is, we here at Hardlands Media did cover some stories way back in 2018 in regards to the immigration crisis, especially what was happening at the Gary Chicago International Airport. And it's difficult to even talk about it even to this day, where nonviolent migrants were chained up, had to crawl on the steps of the airplane. They were first hauled in there on buses and had to crawl up on steps to the airplane to be deported. And the one time we did cover a protest there was a large group of activists, people there speaking the truth, their stories, and the buses were diverted, only to go through Chicago, which was a sanctuary city at the time, and then to be deported through O'Hare International Airport. Folks, we got to treat each other with humanity and kindness, and there's a reason why things are the way they are, and it isn't just because an individual woke up someday and said, gee, how can I ruin somebody's day? The enemy are the people who are controlling the system and have convinced all of you that your neighbor or a homeless person on the street is the real bad guy. Let's move on now to another issue. And Eric, I'm going to have to push back on this thing right here for you. We might have a little bit of an antagonist back and forth. An election system we could trust. 2016, 2020, but hell, even before those two election cycles, there's been numerous examples of, elections not really being squeaky clean here in the United States, even though we like to boast we have the best system. How the hell are we going to create an election system we can trust? I say this not to be antagonistic, but my viewing audience, we have seen it. Everyone's seen it. An election system we can trust. How do we get there?
Well, the first thing is to demand it, right?
Correct.
And to not just say, the step one is saying, it's not good. It's there are plenty of reasons to be suspicious and to worry about what's going on and whatnot. So there are ways, like it is possible. It's perfectly possible to run an election system in a way that's trustworthy, that really no one would have trouble in. But you can't do that and run the election system with machines, on a for-profit basis. It really has to be so. The main thing is to get away from private companies making voting machines, or private companies having any interactions in elections at all. And so there's a big concept of called open source and open source software. I happen to be a software engineer myself, so and so I have some knowledge of these things. And the way open source works is that the source code is posted in a place where anyone can look at it, anyone can audit it. And so, kind of what you might call the white hat programmers like me can look at it. And if there's a backdoor in there, if there's, a vulnerability in there, if there's something nefarious in there, you're going to have people looking at the code and saying, well, what's this thing? And it's a way that you can have code and you can have systems that you can trust. But we're going to have to demand it. It's going to have to be, written into these laws at the federal and state level, that any voting system that you're using has to be open source. It has to be auditable. It has to be transparent. And it's really not that hard to do. These aren't insurmountable problems. It's really more about the will to do it and getting people in there who really want to run it this way. You could have a system where you do your vote on the machine and you get a receipt. Right, we get a receipt at the ATM. We can get a receipt at the gas station, and then you could go on the computer hours later and put in the check number, and you could see your vote on the roll on the system. And if everything is open source, and even the hardware as well, the open source hardware is also a thing. If you have that all open source, and transparent, and auditable, you can have a system that you can trust. But it's going to have to be insisted upon to get there.
All right. You know what? You changed my mind. Yeah, okay. Oh, that's not only that. Look, here's something I agree with. Okay, but the thing is, like, the reason why I think many of us are so jaded by the electoral system is because, let's face it, I just got to bring this up to people. Ranked choice voting, we need it. We need third parties and independents on the debate stage, on the ballot. Americans need to diversify in their choices. Americans need to start stepping up and demanding more. And look, we're entering into another presidential election cycle here, folks. And I'm just going to say this. Popular vote doesn't mean jack currently here in the United States. In another democracy, in another country that has democracy or is a republic, popular vote does mean something. The reason why I'm telling you right now that popular vote means nothing currently right now is we have this fantastic thing called the Electoral College, which supersedes popular vote. Now, again, the presidential candidate who wins the Electoral College, I don't care if the opponent gets the majority popular vote. If they don't win the Electoral College, well, that's it. Simple as that. 1, 2, 3. This isn't room for debate. You don't have to get upset, put down your mimosa, but this is the truth. The Electoral College supersedes everything. And until we get rid of the Electoral College, which is why I'm loving this right here, enact national popular vote system to fix the Electoral College, nothing's going to change. Democratic voters, Republican voters that cry that your candidate didn't win even though they got popular vote. Electoral College, this thing here I'm highlighting, don't make me tap the sign, supersedes everything. So until this fantastic thing is gone, the one I'm highlighting here, do not cry. So that's why we have to enact an election system we can trust. Well
And the
done.
national popular vote is an interesting one. It's actually a state-by-state setup where the state legislatures pass a law that says they're going to give all their electors to the winner of the popular vote. And if you get more than half the state houses passing that, it's basically like an interstate compact, and it would go into effect, and it would make the electoral college like moot. And so what's interesting is there are these workarounds. Like the other way you do it, of course, is a constitutional amendment to just take it out of the Constitution, which would be the preferred way. But there is a workaround that could be done. And so my point is there are fixes for these things. It's not that these things aren't fixable. It's all about the will, and it's all about pushing back against big money.
Mm-hmm. There we go. Now let's move on to this one here. Corey, revamp taxation and funding. Now, when we talk about taxes, I guess here in America, a lot of us think, oh no, I'm going to get taxed more. Well, how do we fix this taxation system that we have? Because again, I think many Americans are just wondering how many times I'm going to be bled dry. And I think the average working class citizen, the average person who's trying to mind their own business, who's not even politically involved, they're just worried about this revamp taxation and funding. Can you explain this demand, and how the hell can we get a politician or any group to really go along?
Yeah, so this is one of those these topics which we would confront in direct actions, and do these things where we break up rallies and kind of bring the attention to this. The attention to the point that we want to bring up is there's really no reason why low to low moderate income people need to be paying taxes at all. It's completely regressive. The taxation system should be focused on those with the wealth to have that spared to go into the system. One thing that one of my big kind of points that I talk about, and it's also, in general, we support, free public education up until, undergrad, grad, all that. But particularly that we don't have public funded or kind of like free for people like law schools, because a lot of the times these laws, it's very like a lawyerly thing, and there's a high entry cost to that, meaning that we only really get usually, a certain class of people within the legal profession. And if we have only that class of people within the legal profession, then we're just inherently going to have uneven laws. And the tax is definitely included in that. Tax law is incredibly complicated. You basically need to be a tax attorney to even start to understand it. And one of my big points is that if a law is written as such that you need a law degree to understand it, it is my belief that that is a bad law. There's a reason why it's difficult to understand, because it is regressive. So that's definitely a big part of the tax law. A lot of people that don't realize too is that unhoused people that aren't in the workforce, they pay taxes too, through sales tax, an incredibly regressive tax that even though you turn people into people that contribute into it, and still they don't get any kind of benefit from it. And then also just in talking about like divestment of funding towards more progressive things. But yeah, that's the biggest thing is kind of just confronting out the complete nonsense of tax law.
And I just want to say about taxes, I think we on the left, we need to change the way we think about taxes and talk about taxes. Like there's this core question: what are taxes for? Right? And people think they know the answer to that. People think, oh, my taxes are to pay for the government, to pay for services. And the correct answer is no. That's not what taxes are for. Especially, directly at the federal level, the U.S. government creates the currency. And so the taxes have nothing to do with federal spending. That's a BS linkage. And even at the state and local level, to the extent that taxes are used to pay for things, that's a policy choice. It doesn't have to be that way. The purpose of taxes are to cycle the money back in, because, of course, you can't just print money. Eventually, it's going to be inflationary and be a problem. You have to cycle the money back in. And so then the question is, who are you cycling the money back in from? And this whole system has been set up and rigged so that the burden of the taxes are falling more and more on people who work and less on people who make money off of money, the billionaire class. And one of our big goals of the left needs to be to change that and to say working people need to basically be paying very little taxes. And the billionaire class, the mega corporations, they need to be paying the majority of the taxes in a simple progressive tax system.
Yep, and just to touch on the public banks too, the biggest thing that I see as a necessity for public banks is to have the access for very low to 0% APR loans. The banks get basically 0 APR loans from the Federal Reserve whenever they ask for it. The banks can get as much money as they want. They can play casino with your money, and if it doesn't work out, they just basically get more money from the Fed. And so, one of the
be nice.
Yeah, one of the biggest ways for a low to moderate income person to build wealth in this country is through home ownership, which people have been excluded out and continue to be. So if we have like the public banks options, if you're like a Savvy Savs viewer, Roger Meadows is big on that.
Shout out to Roger Meadows, good friend of the show.
Yes, so he can tell you a lot about public banks, but that's also an important aspect on this to give the working class access to finance.
All right. That's now let's move on to the final one. Democratize the enterprise. Now, here's the thing. I am a huge, not a huge. I'm more of a Warhammer 40K fan, but the enterprise, love it. But in all seriousness, democratize enterprise, provide federal funds and incentives for employee-owned and controlled business. Sounds great. Enforce antitrust laws. Break up the monopolies, especially the corporate media monopolies. There you go. Promote and support labor unions, worker co-ops. Mandate that all publicly traded companies reserve board seats for employee representation. Transition companies that provide essential services into democratically controlled utilities.
Talking about you, YouTube.
Eric, man. Oh, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to scream at YouTube because I remember a different era of YouTube when it used to be somewhat of a meritocracy. Maybe I got rose-colored glasses on, but democratize the enterprise.
So this is into...
Okay, go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, this is into Professor Richard Wolff territory, of course. With him, like he views this as the next evolution of socialism itself, in that to be focusing on worker co-ops, on this type of democratization of the workplace, of the corporation, and there's this idea that, and he talks about it, how it should seem crazy to us that, we go to work and it's a dictatorship. It's a hierarchical dictatorship where you have a boss or bosses and what they say goes. And if they decide tomorrow that you don't have a job, then you don't have a job and turn your life upside down. So, yeah, of course, worker co-ops are should be the future. That again, it's a thing that we need to be demanding. It's a longer range. It's not something that we can do tomorrow, but it's something that systemically we need to be demanding that these systemic changes happen to push us towards this. And it's another part of this is, as a left, I think we need to be painting a picture of a better world. What would our better lefty world look like? And one of the big things of what our better world would look like is democracy in the workplace.
Agreed. And I think that's what we all need to have here. So look, gentlemen, this was your first time on our show, and I want you both to come back on here, because the thing is, what I'm want to urge everyone that sees this video, be it on YouTube, Rockfin, Odyssey, Rumble, or Twitch, or on our show on Can TV, look, take a step back and ask yourselves, supporting electoral politics, I get it. People like to vote. For some people, it is what it is. For many, they're burnt out by electoral politics. But we need to start stepping up and fighting for a better future. And we need to also start trying to build a community and communities in which we are going to leave something behind for the next generation. Our politicians dance and drink because they believe that you are weak. They're doing insider trading. They get to have gold-plated health care. They get to have a nice, cushy lobbyist job waiting for them. They have connections for their friends and families so that they can live their best lives, while the rest of us work 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet, and that's still not enough. We face student debt crisis. We have a medical bankruptcy crisis. We don't have health care. Our trains are literally derailing. Our air, soil, and water are being polluted, and if we don't step up, it's going to get progressively worse. So, Eric, Corey, if people want to follow you on social media, where can they go? They already know that you two help out produce for the Sabby Sab Show, who's a contributor to Revolutionary Blackout Network. Where can they go so they can follow you guys? And also, I want to hear how updates are going to be happening with this. Who's listening to you? What groups are implementing these 11 demands? What third parties or independents are implementing these demands or putting them in on their campaign? Where can people go to find you guys on social media?
Yeah, so there's, I think you put it in the chat a couple times, there's 11demands.org, which is kind of the essential site that I posted that kind of lays out strategy and lays out the demands. You can also find me, I have it on my name tag there on the screen at erictred.com is my kind of my central site. There's a contact form at the bottom, so if you want to reach out, you can reach us that way. And yeah, it's this challenge of I know people are going to say, okay, you've got a website and you talk about demands, what else you got? And and at this point, we're calling out for collaboration. We're saying, how can we come together on a list of demands? The main thing is to have a demands-based movement. That's the biggest thing I feel strongly about. And it doesn't even have to be the list that I've come up with, but it has to be something. And so that's the challenge. How can we bring that together and make it into something real? And, let's start talking about that.
Agreed.
Yep,
All
definitely.
Right. And Corey, where can people go to find you on social media?
Yeah, so the 11demands.com or .org will both work, and we have our contact information at the bottom of that page. Also, just, it's kind of an idea we've been toying around with, is kind of an idea of 11 Demands Collective and just kind of getting people together that might be able to kind of create actions wherever they be. So that's something if you're interested in or if you have feedback, definitely do reach out to us, through the site at the bottom of the page. And yeah, Kit, just thank you so much to you and to your audience.
No problem.
And
no
you'll
problem.
see us on Sabby Sabs.
as they should. So everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. We will definitely be clipping this and posting this on our social media. Shout out to our viewing audience here at Can TV. Stay tuned as we have the rest of our main show happening just after this short little break. My guests, thank you, Eric, Connor, or Corey. Sorry about that. Corey, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you guys very soon, and the door is always open for you two to return back here at Hard Lens Media. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot,
so much.
People still owe money. People still owe money. No. People still owe money. People still owe money.
It looks to me as though you learned to love your prison. I guess you'd say you made it your own. Who knew that freedom's such a difficult decision? I bet you finally feel like you're home. Home.
Right in the center where the haves meet. You were proud of incremental half speeds. You were getting down in the AOC dance line, hands tied, nodding to the backbeat. You'll Secret Service dive in front of any representative alive, being asked for the very bare minimum. And you'll turn into that same kind of hard right villain you detested should we mention they could ever muster maximum. Cause liberal denial's such a lofty ataraxia, where morals take a back seat, not up in the cab, but in hidden panels made by federal human traffickers. If you trust the autopilot, then you're just a sleeping passenger, passively accepting that it isn't us the bastards serve, making peace with all the evil walking on this rancid earth, seeking unity with those who bound your hands at birth, glancing up at fascists on a bloody dais thinking they just need a push. Not a holy man, but I'm praying for a burning bush. Yeah, I know you'd love to look away, but love, you need to look. There are many massacres the country manufactured that will never make the books. Now here's your fucking hook.
It looks to me as though you learned to love your prison. I guess you'd say you made it your own. Who knew that freedom's such a difficult decision? I bet you finally feel like you're home.
Home on the range of excuses. Justify some fracking, water down pollution, paint a fresh coat of bipartisan charm over backroom collusion. Your consent is being manufactured by illusions, marketing executives in federal seclusion, working day and night to keep you just the side of lucid, and too beat down for calling out abuses. So fuck all these progressives who can speak on revolution once they empty all your powder out and spit on all your fuses. I prefer to judge a leader not by quality of tweets, but the six-figure book deal she chooses. Donors he betrays, and donors that he'd gladly take a bullet before he refuses. Slogans he reuses, buzzwords he produces that he spews like mucus. Well, two can play at that. So here's the inner dialogue of every time I snap, and it's fine-tuned to ruthless, and saying politics are useless. Just a bunch of loose lips tweeting cute shit, power suits, taxpayer booze trips. Bunker at the ready when the shoe flips, and there will be no news clips. There will just be
People still owe money. People still owe money. No.
It looks to me as though you learned to love your prison. I guess you'd say you made it your own. Who knew that freedom's such a difficult decision? I bet you finally feel like you're home. Home.
People still